I stood near the fellowship hall kitchen, nursing lukewarm coffee, watching Bradley stack folding chairs while the parking lot outside filled with trucks and sedans. Late November morning had that bone-deep cold, the kind that makes gravel crunch loud under your boots and turns your breath to fog. Through the propped open door came the smell of diesel from the church furnace mixed with casserole dishes wrapped in foil, green bean and sweet potato, and something with those fried onions on top. Diane swept in, carrying her contribution, face flushed from the cold, or maybe the wine she'd already started. I'd been married to her 35 years, long enough to know that look, the one that meant she'd been planning something for weeks and I was about to find out what. She set down her dish and tapped a wine glass with her fork. The room went quiet. 40-some people turned to look. "I just want everyone to know," she said, smile bright and terrible. "Warren and I are in an open relationship now." Dead silence. Cold drafted through the door. Someone's casserole dish scraped linoleum. I set down my coffee, looked right at her. "As you wish." Then I turned to Margot Hensley, Diane's college roommate, sitting 2 tables over in her black skirt and practical boots, a state attorney, widow, woman who'd never bought into Diane's games. "Margot," I said, keeping my voice level, "you free Saturday for dinner?" Margot didn't blink. That wicked grin spread slow across her face. "I can do everything better than her." The room exploded. Diane's smile crumbled like wet paper. I'd inherited Granddad's farm in June of '89, month before I married Diane. Measured and marked every boundary myself, 42 brass-capped stakes driven true into bedrock. Diane grabbed my arm in the parking lot after, but I was already thinking about those survey monuments, wondering whose name was on which deed. The next morning, I walked my fence line at first light, breath steaming, frost crunching under my boots. Ritual I'd kept for 40 years. Check the boundary markers, make sure everything held true. The surveyor's transit sat in my truck bed, that old Leica my granddad had used before me. Cold metal bit through my work gloves as I set it up at the northwest corner. Sightline clear, monument 12 feet east of the oak, just like my notes said. Brass cap catching weak November sun. I checked each marker methodically. The work, it calmed me. Had to level the tripod just so adjust for magnetic declination, record the reading. No room for sloppiness in surveying. Measure twice, mark permanent. That's what Granddad taught me. My phone buzzed around 7. Curtis, who ran the equipment auction every Saturday. "Heard about the party," he said. No preamble. Curtis didn't waste words. "News travels. She brought that developer fella, Rick Holloway, the one who buys farms and chops them into half-acre lots." Curtis spat. I could hear it through the phone. "Bidding on your old disc harrow like he already owned the place." Cold settled in my gut that had nothing to do with November wind. "Appreciate the heads up. Auction's at 9 tomorrow if you want to see what he's sniffing around for." Curtis paused. "Warren, your granddad's place came to you in '89, right? Before you married her?" "June of '89, month before the wedding. Might want to remember that." He hung up. I kept walking. Monument 17, southwest pasture. Perfect alignment. Then I noticed something that made me stop cold. Fresh boot prints in the frost around stake 12. Not mine. Wrong tread pattern. Someone had been out here, recent enough that the prints hadn't fully melted. Who'd been walking my property line? The wind picked up, whistling through bare branches. I pulled my collar tight and headed back to the truck, but the unease followed me like a shadow. Inside the house, Diane sat at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out. She didn't look up when I came through the door, just kept shuffling pages. The coffee pot was cold. She'd made a pot and drank it all herself. "We need to talk," she said. I washed my hands at the sink, dirt and frost melt swirling down the drain. "Go ahead." "What you did yesterday was humiliating." I had to laugh at that, turned around, drying my hands on the towel. "What I did?" "In front of everyone, asking out my friend. Your announcement seemed pretty definitive to me. You said open relationship. I accepted the terms." Her jaw tightened. "I was trying to be honest about my feelings, trying to open up communication. By telling 40 people at a church potluck?" I hung up the towel. "That's not communication, Diane. That's a power play. You're twisting this." "No, I'm just not playing the part you wrote for me." She stood up fast, chair scraping loud. "I wanted to see if you still cared, if you'd fight for us." There it was. The test. The game. Everything with Diane was a test. 35 years, I said quietly. 35 years I've been taking your tests. Everyone designed to make me prove something, beg for something, chase after something you kept just out of reach. I walked past her toward the bedroom. I'm done with tests. Where are you going? To get my survey journals. Need to check some boundary documentation. Behind me, her voice went sharp. Why? I stopped in the doorway, looked back. She'd gone pale. Just want to make sure I know exactly where my property lines are, I said. Seems like a good time to verify things. Her hands twisted together. The farm's been ours for 35 years. Has it? I left her standing there and went to dig through the barn office, looking for the leather-bound journal I'd kept that first summer. The one from June of '89, when I'd measured every inch of Granddad's 180 acres and marked it mine. The barn smelled like old hay and motor oil and decades of accumulated paper, feed receipts, equipment manuals, tax records. I found the journal in the third filing cabinet, under a stack of seed catalogs from 1991. Opened it. First page, my own handwriting from 40 years back. Castellan Property Survey, June 1989. Property inherited per J. Castellan will, dated 1988. My phone buzzed. Text from Margot. Heard Diane's already calling around about lawyers. Want to grab coffee Monday? No pressure. Just seems like you might need someone who knows estate law. I texted back, Monday works. Thanks. Then I sat there in the cold barn office, journal open in my hands, and wondered where Granddad's actual will had ended up. The journal mentioned it, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen the document itself. Outside, a car engine started. Through the dusty window, I watched Diane's sedan back down the driveway, tires spitting gravel. When her taillights disappeared down the county road, I noticed something tucked in the journal's back pocket, a hand-drawn map showing where Granddad had wanted me to plant the survey monuments. Every stake numbered and marked, and in the corner, in his cramped handwriting, measure twice, mark permanent. This ground holds our name. Saturday's auction was held in Curtis's big metal building, space heaters roaring against the December cold, smell of diesel fuel and coffee and the particular scent of old machinery, grease and rust and history. 40, 50 men milled around, hands in pockets, breath fogging. I knew most of them. We'd bought and sold equipment to each other for decades, helped each other through bad harvests and equipment breakdowns. I saw Diane's car in the lot before I even got inside. She stood near the back with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, tanned like he spent time on golf courses instead of in fields, wore expensive casual clothes, the kind that cost $300 to look like they cost $30. His Lexus was parked sideways, taking up 2 spaces. Curtis caught my eye and jerked his chin toward them. Rick Holloway. The auction started. Curtis's voice boomed through the building as he worked through smaller items. Toolboxes, jacks, a decent welder. I watched Diane and Rick bid aggressively on a disc harrow I'd stored in Curtis's lot, equipment I'd planned to sell this spring to offset property taxes. They won it. Rick signed the slip without even checking the price. Curtis called break. I walked over to get more coffee from the urn near the office. That's Rick Holloway, Curtis said, low, standing next to me. Buys farms, subdivides them. Turned the Morrison place into 30 half-acre lots. Put in a subdivision called Whispering Meadows. He snorted. Only thing whispering is the sound of Morrison rolling in his grave. What's he want with my equipment? Not your equipment he wants. Curtis poured his own coffee. You know what he wants, right? Cold understanding settled in my chest. The farm. Rick wanted my farm. I looked back at them. Diane was laughing at something Rick said, touching his arm, the way she used to touch mine, back when we were young, and she still thought farming was romantic instead of boring. How long? I asked. Saw them at the feed store in October, then at the diner in November. Curtis sipped his coffee. Didn't think it was my business to say anything before. Figured you knew. I didn't, but I should have. The auction wound down. I drove home with my jaw clenched tight, hands gripping the wheel. Winter fields stretched out on both sides of the county road, bare and frozen. New Year's Day came and went. January 2nd, a process server knocked on my door at 8 in the morning. I signed for the envelope, hands still smelling like wood smoke from the fireplace. Inside, divorce petition. 40 pages of legal language. I sat at the kitchen table and read every word. Standard stuff until page 17, then my blood went cold. Petitioner requests partition of jointly held real property commonly known as the Castellan Farm, 180 acres, County Road 47, including all structures, improvements, and appurtenances. Partition. They wanted to force a sale of the farm. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Diane was claiming the farm as marital property, community asset, and she wanted it sold so we could split the proceeds. 180 acres. The ground my granddad cleared and fenced. The land I'd measured and marked, stake by stake. The summer before I married her. The place I'd spent 40 years maintaining, improving, protecting. They wanted to sell it. Probably to Rick Holloway, who'd chop it into suburban plots called something like Sunset Meadows or Heritage Hills. My hands shook. I set the papers down. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Diane hadn't come home New Year's Eve. Hadn't called either. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margot. She answered on the second ring. Warren? Got served divorce papers this morning. Silence. Then, I'll be over in 20 minutes. Don't sign anything. Margot arrived with a leather briefcase and reading glasses, hair pulled back practical. She smelled like the cold outside, and something subtle, lavender maybe. Not the heavy floral perfume Diane wore. She spread the papers on my kitchen table and read in silence, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. The clock above the stove ticked steady. Outside, a cardinal called. Finally, she looked up. Warren, whose name is on the original deed from 1989, when you inherited the farm. Mine, just mine. Granddad left it to me specifically. Not you and Diane. We weren't married yet. Got married in July. Deed was recorded in June. Margot tapped her pen against the pad. Okay, that's important. Very important. She flipped back through the petition. This open marriage announcement, when exactly did she make it? Thanksgiving, Fellowship Hall, 40-some witnesses. And she announced it publicly. She was the one who declared the relationship open. That's right. Margot's eyes narrowed. She wrote something down, underlined it twice. What? I asked. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw something hard in her expression. Something that reminded me she'd spent 20 years fighting legal battles. Warren, I think this whole thing was a setup. The open marriage announcement, I don't think it was about honesty or feelings. She tapped the partition demand. I think it was legal strategy. My coffee had gone cold. Explain. If you had been the one to pursue another relationship, if you'd been the one to abandon the marriage during this open period, she could argue you forfeited your claim to marital assets, including the farm. The room tilted slightly. But I didn't abandon anything, I said. I accepted her terms. Exactly. And she was the one actually seeing someone else. Margot smiled, but it wasn't warm. She set a trap, then walked into it herself. Outside, wind rattled the windows. The heater kicked on with a groan. Can she really claim the farm? I asked. After 35 years, even if I inherited it before marriage? Margot closed the petition. That depends on a lot of things. Documentation, whether assets were commingled, whether you can prove the farm remained your separate property. She met my eyes. Warren, do you still have your inheritance paperwork, the original will, the deed? I have my survey journal from '89, found it in the barn. It mentions Granddad's will. I need more than mentions. I need the actual documents. I'll find them. She packed up her briefcase. At the door, she turned back. Warren, whose name is on the original deed from 1989? Just yours or both of you? Just mine. Then that's where we start. Margot's office sat above the old pharmacy on Main Street, one of those Victorian buildings with tall windows and crown molding. I climbed the stairs Tuesday evening, boots leaving mud tracks on carpet that had seen better days. Inside, law books lined the walls floor to ceiling. Her desk was solid oak, scarred from decades of use, papers stacked in neat piles. She poured bourbon into 2 glasses without asking. The smell was sharp and clean, cutting through the mustiness of old building and older books. I spent 3 years fighting my in-laws over my husband's business after he died, she said, handing me a glass. They used every trick, claimed I'd manipulated him into changing his will, argued I hadn't contributed to the business, tried to prove I was an unfit guardian to my own grief. She sat across from me, lamplight catching her reading glasses. I know how families weaponize grief and greed. I sipped the bourbon. It burned going down, left warmth behind. Diane's lawyer is Paul Brecken, good attorney, aggressive. He specializes in high-asset divorce. Margot opened a folder. Here's what they're arguing. 35 years of marriage means all property became marital, regardless of how you acquired it. They'll claim you and Diane improved the farm together, that her contributions, emotional support, household management, whatever, entitle her to half. She never worked the farm, never wanted to. Doesn't matter legally. What matters is documentation. Margot leaned forward. If you can prove the farm was yours before marriage and remained separate property, never refinanced jointly, never used marital funds for improvements, never put her name on the title, then you have a defense. Premarital assets can stay separate if maintained correctly. I never refinanced. Paid off Granddad's mortgage with money from my surveying business. All the improvements came from my income, kept in my separate account. Good. That's very good, she made notes. But Warren, we need paperwork. The original inheritance documents. Your granddad's will. The deed showing it passed to you alone. Without those, Brecken will argue you've lost the documentation, which means you can't prove separate ownership. I'll find them. Margot studied me over her glasses. How confident are you that they exist? That they're somewhere findable? Granddad was meticulous. Everything in writing, everything filed. He kept a metal lockbox with important documents. I remember seeing it when I was young. I paused. I just don't know where it ended up. She nodded slowly. Then that's our first job, finding that lockbox. Outside, sleet started tapping against the window. Transition weather. Not winter anymore, not spring yet. Just cold and wet and gray. There's something else, Margot said. The open marriage announcement. The timing bothers me. How so? She made it public before discussing it with you. That's not how people actually open marriages. That's performance. Margot swirled her bourbon. I think she wanted witnesses. Wanted it on record that you both agreed to see other people. Then when you inevitably stayed faithful and she pursued Rick, she'd claim you were the one who abandoned the marriage emotionally, that you refused to engage with her needs. The heater rattled, old building settling in the cold. But I didn't stay faithful, I said. I asked you out. Exactly. And I said yes. That small smile again. Her trap closed on empty air. I thought about Diane's face at the potluck, that moment when her confidence crumbled. She'd expected me to beg, to fight, to publicly humiliate myself trying to stop her. Instead, I'd accepted her terms and moved on. If you can prove the farm's yours, Margot said, she gets nothing from it in the divorce. Her lawyer knows this, that's why they filed so fast, why they're pushing for partition. They want to force a sale before you can establish separate ownership. How long do I have? Hearing scheduled for February 14th, Judge Morrison. She grimaced. He's old school, doesn't like surprises or incomplete documentation. If we show up without solid proof, he'll rule based on what's in front of him. And right now, that's 35 years of marriage and nothing showing. The farm stayed separate. 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks to find documents that might not exist anymore. I'll start tomorrow, I said. Margot walked me to the door. Her hand touched my arm just briefly, warm and solid and certain. Warren, for what it's worth, I always thought you deserved better than how she treated you. Everyone did. We just didn't know how to say it. I drove home through freezing rain, wipers beating steady rhythm. The farm looked dark and empty when I pulled in, no lights on. Diane hadn't been home in 3 days. The barn office was colder than outside. My breath fogged as I pulled filing cabinets open one by one. Decades of paper, tax returns, equipment receipts, veterinary records from when we'd kept cattle, seed catalogs, soil test results, everything yellowed and musty. I found my survey journal again, held it under the work lamp and studied every page. June 1989. I'd been so careful, so precise, every measurement recorded, every monument located and marked. Page 12. Property inherited per J. Castellan will dated 1988. Granddaughter clause, Warren Castellan, sole heir. The will existed, I'd seen it, I'd read it, but where? I searched until my hands were numb and my back ached, found nothing. Outside, ice was forming on the pond, winter locking everything down. My phone buzzed, text from Margot. Any luck? I typed back. Not yet, but I know it's here somewhere. Her response came quick. Keep looking, we need that will. I stared at the filing cabinets, the stacks of paper, the 40 years of accumulated documentation. Somewhere in this mess was the proof I needed. Somewhere in this cold barn was the deed to my life's work. I just had to find it before Diane's lawyer buried me in arguments I couldn't counter. My nephew Noah called on a Wednesday evening, middle of January. I was heating up soup on the stove, watching snow fall through the kitchen window. light, powdery stuff that wouldn't amount to much. Uncle Warren, his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. We need to talk. I turned down the burner. All right. Why didn't you tell me about Granddad's farm? Cold crawled up my spine. What about it? That it was supposed to go to the whole family, not just you. He paused. Diane showed me proof. Granddad's will had a clause about bloodline inheritance. Mom was supposed to get a share, which means I'm entitled to something. My hand tightened on the phone. Noah, that's not... Don't lie to me. I've seen the documents. Diane's lawyer explained it all. If the farm gets sold, I get 30%. That's almost $700,000, Uncle Warren. Money that should have been in our family all along. What documents did you see? Does it matter? The point is, you've been hoarding this place for 40 years while the rest of us got nothing. His voice rose. Mom died thinking Granddad loved you more. You know how that felt for her? For me? Noah, listen to me. No, I'm done listening. Diane said you'd try to manipulate me, make me feel guilty. But I have a right to my inheritance. We all do. The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, soup forgotten on the stove. My sister had died 6 years back, cancer, and Noah was all I had left of her. We'd never been close, but I'd thought we at least had respect between us. Now Diane had turned him against me with lies and promises of money that didn't exist. The soup started to boil over. I pulled it off the heat and dumped it in the sink. Wasn't hungry anymore. Christmas Eve service. I sat in my usual pew, 4th row from the front, right side. Same spot for 35 years. The sanctuary smelled like pine boughs and candle wax. Organ music drifted down from the balcony, slow and reverent. People filtered in, bundled in winter coats, stamping snow off boots. I nodded to folks I knew, Bradley and his wife, Curtis with his daughter, the Johnsons from the next farm over. Then Diane walked in. She wore red, bright, deliberate red, and she wasn't alone. Rick Holloway on one side in a cashmere coat, Noah on the other, looking uncomfortable in a tie. The three of them walked down the center aisle together. Whispers rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. People turned to look, then quickly looked away. Diane chose a pew on the left side, front row. Couldn't be more obvious if she'd taken out an ad in the church bulletin. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward. The organ music seemed louder somehow, or maybe it was just the blood pounding in my ears. Pastor Gill began the service. His voice was steady, familiar, comfort in routine, but halfway through, he departed from the usual readings. Tonight, I want to talk about foundations, he said. Jesus tells us about 2 men who built houses, one built on rock, one built on sand. When the storms came, only one house stood. His eyes swept the congregation, paused, just briefly, on Diane's pew. Some foundations look solid. They're pretty, well-decorated, impressive to visitors. But when pressure comes, when wind and rain and flood test the structure, you find out what's underneath. You find out what's real. The sanctuary was silent, except for the radiator clanking. A false foundation won't hold, Pastor Gill said quietly. No matter how much you paint it, how much you decorate it, how many witnesses you bring to admire it, when the storm comes, the truth comes out. I felt eyes on me. Half the congregation watching to see how I'd react, the other half watching Diane. I kept my eyes on Pastor Gill and didn't move. After the service, people filed out slowly. I stayed in my pew, letting the crowd thin. Curtis stopped by, squeezed my shoulder without saying anything. The Johnsons nodded. Bradley's wife whispered, "Praying for you." I finally stood to leave. Made it halfway up the aisle before Diane stepped out from a side door, blocking my path. Rick and Noah flanked her like bodyguards. Warren, her voice was sugar-sweet, performative. "Merry Christmas." Diane. "This doesn't have to be ugly. Rick's made a very generous offer, $1.1 million for the farm. We split it 50-50. Everyone walks away happy." She tilted her head. "You could buy a nice condo, travel, finally do something besides worry about fence lines." Rick smiled, predator smile. "It's more than fair market value. With the divorce costs you're facing, the legal fees, this is the smart move." I looked at Noah. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "No," I said. Diane's smile thinned. "Don't be stupid. You can't win this. The farm's been ours for 35 years. The judge will order partition anyway. You're just wasting money fighting the inevitable. The farm was mine before it was ours, and it'll be mine after." "You can't prove that." "Can't I?" Something flickered in her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear. You're being stubborn, Rick said. My investors are waiting. We have a timeline. Then I guess you'll be disappointed. I walked past them out into the cold night. Snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the church steps. My boots left prints across the parking lot. Behind me, I heard Rick's voice, sharp and frustrated. You said he'd be reasonable. Diane's response was too quiet to make out. I drove home through empty roads. The farm was dark when I arrived. No lights, no warmth, no welcome. Just my truck's headlights sweeping across bare fields and the farmhouse where I'd lived my whole adult life. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights, just sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. The refrigerator hummed. Wind rattled the windows. My phone buzzed. Text from Margot. Heard you had company at church. You okay? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. They offered me money. Rick Holloway has investors waiting. They want this done fast. Her reply came quick. That means they're worried. Keep looking for those documents. We're running out of time. I set the phone down and went to the window. Outside, snow covered everything, the driveway, the fields, the fences, covering the survey monuments I'd placed 40 years ago, covering the ground that held my name. Somewhere out there, under snow and frozen earth, 42 brass caps marked the boundaries of everything I'd worked for. I just had to prove they were mine. To mark. January dragged into February. The cold let up slightly, enough that snow turned to slush, then froze again at night. Mud season coming, that messy in-between time when nothing was solid anymore. Margot drove out to the farm on a Saturday morning. She wore jeans and work boots, hair pulled back in a braid, brought coffee in a thermos and work gloves in her jacket pocket. Thought you might need help with that fence repair you mentioned, she said. I hadn't mentioned fence repair, but the north pasture did need attention, and I appreciated her not making it about the case, not making it about anything except showing up. We worked in comfortable silence. The wire was old, rusted in spots, and the T-posts had heaved during freeze-thaw cycles. I showed her how to use the post driver. Lift high, let gravity do the work, don't fight the tool. She caught on quick. Strong for her size, efficient with her movements. We got 12 posts reset before stopping for coffee. My husband taught me this, she said, pouring from the thermos. Steam rose between us. He grew up on a farm in Kansas. Said every lawyer should know how to fix a fence and change oil. Keep you honest. Smart man. He was. She sipped her coffee, looking out across the fields. Died 3 years ago. Heart attack. 1 minute we were discussing what to have for dinner. The next he was gone. I'm sorry. His parents tried to take his business, said I didn't contribute to it, that it should go to his brother. We'd worked that business together for 15 years. I did all the estate planning, client intake, contract review, but according to them, I was just the wife. Her jaw tightened. I fought them for 2 years. Cost me everything in legal fees, but I won. I understood then why she'd agreed to help me. This wasn't just a case to her, it was familiar ground. They used every trick, she continued. Made me out to be a gold digger, questioned my grief, tried to prove I'd manipulated him into changing his will. The whole thing was ugly and exhausting, and I swore I'd never let anyone else go through it alone, if I could help. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of thawing earth and last year's dead grass. Thank you, I said, for being here. She smiled, small and real. Where else would I be? We finished the coffee and got back to work. The physical labor felt good, honest and straightforward. No hidden meanings, no legal maneuvering, just wire and posts and the satisfaction of making something sturdy. By afternoon, we'd finished the north line. My back ached, but it was the good kind of ache. Proof of work done right. Come inside, I said. I'll make lunch. The kitchen was cold. I got the fire going in the wood stove while Margot washed up at the sink. The smell of wood smoke mixed with soap and the coffee we'd drunk earlier, comfortable smells, home smells. I made sandwiches, nothing fancy, just ham and cheese, on bread I'd baked 2 days prior. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat with Diane for 35 years. Different now, though. Lighter, somehow. I've been thinking about your case, Margot said, wiping mustard from her thumb. Diane's lawyer withdrew last week. She hired someone new, Marcus Fenway, out of the city. More expensive, more aggressive. What's that mean? Means she's worried. Fenway doesn't take cases he can't win, which tells me Brecken saw something that made him nervous. She leaned back in her chair. But Fenway will dig harder. He'll argue commingling, joint improvements, anything to muddy the waters. We need that original documentation, Warren. The will, the deed. Without it, even a good argument won't be enough. I'd searched the barn office 3 times, the farmhouse twice. Come up empty every time. Where else would your granddad have kept important papers? Margot asked. He had a lockbox. Metal, about this big. I held my hands apart. Gray with a black handle. But I haven't seen it since I was young. Safe deposit box, maybe? Granddad didn't trust banks much. Kept everything at home. Margot drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. When did he die? March of '89. Farmhouse sat empty from March to June while the estate settled. Then it came to me. And you moved in right away? Week after the wedding, July. Her eyes sharpened. So there were 3 months when the house was empty. Anyone have access during that time? I thought back. My sister helped me clean it out, and Diane came with me a few times before the wedding. Wanted to see the place, plan where furniture would go. Did she have a key? The question hung in the air between us. Yeah, I said slowly. I gave her a key so she could measure rooms for curtains. Margot's expression went carefully neutral. Warren, is it possible Diane found that lockbox back before you got married, and maybe kept it? The idea settled in my gut like a stone. Why would she do that? Because she knew it proved the farm was yours, and if she ever needed leverage, if she ever wanted to force a sale, she'd need you not to have that documentation. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the field stretched empty and brown. February light made everything look washed out, colorless. You're saying she's had it for 35 years. Planned this from the beginning. I'm saying it's possible. If Fenway knows she has the original documents, he can claim they were lost or destroyed. Without them, you can't prove separate ownership. The judge has to rule based on the marriage length. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the windowsill. There has to be another copy, Margot said. Wills get filed with the county, deeds get recorded. We just need to find where. County recorder's office? That's where I'm looking Monday. But Warren... She came to stand beside me, close enough I could smell her shampoo, something clean and simple. We have 10 days until the hearing. If the documents aren't on file, if Granddad never recorded them officially, we're going to need a different strategy. What strategy? She was quiet for a moment. Then, we need to find that lockbox. Wherever Diane put it, whatever she did with it, that's our only shot now. Outside, a crow called, harsh and lonely in the winter silence. Do you trust me? Margot asked. I looked at her, really looked, saw the strength there, the steadiness, the woman who'd fought her own battle and won, who'd showed up on a Saturday with work gloves and coffee, who'd spent hours driving fence posts without complaint. Yeah, I said. I trust you. Good, because this is going to get uglier before it gets better. The rumors started midweek. I heard about them from Bradley, who called Wednesday evening while I was going through the barn office for the 4th time. Warren, I don't want to overstep, but Natalie's been hearing things at the ladies' luncheon about you. I set down a box of tax returns from 1997. What kind of things? That you're controlling, that Diane spent 35 years trying to have her own life, and you kept her trapped on the farm, that this whole divorce is about her finally finding the courage to leave an oppressive situation. He sighed. It's Rachel Morrison and Susan Fenwick mostly, the younger crowd. And people are buying this. Some are. The ones who think traditional marriage is inherently patriarchal. They're framing you as the bad guy, older man who isolated his wife, made her financially dependent, now punishing her for wanting freedom. I sat down on a feed bucket. The barn office smelled like mice and old paper and 40 years of accumulated dust. What about you? I asked. What do you think? I think I've known you for 20 years, and you've never been anything but decent. But Warren, they're building a narrative. And narratives have power, whether they're true or not. After he hung up, I sat in the dark barn, listening to mice skitter in the walls. Somewhere outside, an owl called. My phone buzzed. Pastor Gill, heard the gossip. Want you to know, the men at church see things differently. Keep your head up. Then Curtis. Saturday auction 9 o'clock. You should come. Bring Margot if she's free. Saturday morning broke cold and clear. Last real cold snap before spring fully arrived. I picked up Margot at her office. She carried a leather folder and wore her practical boots. What's Curtis planning? She asked as we drove. Not sure, but he said I should come. The auction barn was packed, more people than usual for February, 50, 60 men and a handful of women. Curtis stood on his platform surveying the crowd. When he saw me, he nodded. The auction proceeded normally through the first hour. Toolboxes, a hydraulic jack, some fence panels. Then Curtis paused. "Got a special item today," he said. 1985 John Deere 4450 tractor, belonged to Warren Castellan here, been in storage at my place. Starting bid $15,000? I hadn't put that tractor up for sale. Hadn't even thought about it in years. 15, someone called, one of the Johnson brothers. 16, said another voice, Eddie from the feed mill. 17, 18, 19. The bids kept climbing. I watched, confused, as men I'd known for decades drove the price higher and higher, nobody buying to own, buying to give. Finally, Curtis gavelled down at $28,000, 3 times what the tractor was worth. "Sold to Eddie Freeman," Curtis announced. Then Eddie stepped forward and handed me the bill of sale. "It's yours, Warren. We all chipped in. Consider it a loan against equipment Diane's trying to liquidate without your permission." The barn erupted in applause. Men stood, farmers in Carhartt jackets and feed caps, mechanics with grease under their fingernails, retired county workers who remembered my surveying days. Curtis spoke over the noise. "Warren Castellan's word is worth more than any paper. His granddad was straight, his daddy was straight, and he's been straight with every man here. That's worth something." My throat was tight. I managed to nod, shake Eddie's hand. Beside me, Margot touched my arm. "That's your community," she said quietly. After the auction, Curtis pulled me aside near the office. The building was emptying, men heading to their trucks, calling goodbyes. "Diane was here last week," Curtis said, "trying to sell more of your equipment. Said she had legal right as your wife. I told her nothing gets sold without your signature." He spat tobacco juice into a can. "She didn't like that much." "Appreciate it. There's something else." Curtis glanced toward his office. "Come on." Inside, he pulled a file from his desk. "Found this going through old receipts from 1989. Your granddad bought a lockbox for me that spring, March, right before he died. Gray metal, black handle. Said he needed somewhere fireproof for important papers." My heart kicked. "You remember what happened to it?" Curtis asked. "No, I've been looking everywhere." "Well, he bought it March 15th, paid cash, took it with him that day." Curtis studied me. "If he put documents in it, and it was in the farmhouse when he died, then it was there when the house sat empty," I finished. Before I moved in, Margot appeared in the doorway. "Warren, Curtis, you should see this." We followed her outside. A car was parked near the entrance, Diane's sedan, but Diane wasn't in it. Joanne, Curtis's daughter, stood by the office door. "She was here," Joanne said, "saw Warren arrive with Margot and left in a hurry, but she was listening by the window for a while." "How long?" Margot asked sharply. 10 minutes maybe, long enough to hear the tractor sale and whatever you were talking about inside." Margot's face went hard. She turned to me. "Warren, we need to move fast. If Diane heard about the lockbox, if she knows we're looking for it—" "She'll destroy it," I said. Curtis nodded. "Or hide it somewhere you'll never find it." Margot pulled out her phone, started typing fast. "I'm filing an emergency motion. Evidence preservation order. If she has documents related to the estate, she can't destroy them." She looked up. "But Warren, we need to give the judge a reason to believe those documents exist. We need proof she has them." "How do I prove she has something I haven't seen in 35 years? Margot's eyes narrowed. "We don't prove she has them. We prove she knew about them. And we prove she had opportunity to take them." She turned back to her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Curtis squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever you need, you've got backing here. Every man at that auction will testify to your character if it comes to that." I watched Diane's sedan disappear down the county road, taillights fading into distance. Time was running out. The hearing was in 1 week, and somewhere, in a house, a storage unit, a locked drawer, was a gray metal box that held the deed to my entire life. Late February night, alone in the barn office. Temperature had dropped again after 2 days of false spring warmth. My breath fogged as I sat at the old desk, surrounded by 40 years of documentation. Everything I'd measured, everything I'd marked, everything I'd built, and none of it mattered without the one document I couldn't find. I'd opened a bottle of whiskey, not something I did often, but tonight the weight of it all pressed down, Diane's betrayal, Noah's accusations, the community splitting, Margot fighting battles that shouldn't be hers to fight. I pulled out my survey journals, dozens of them, stacked in chronological order, started with 1989 and worked forward. Every property I'd surveyed in 40 years, every boundary established, every monument placed, every measurement recorded to the inch. Boring work, Diane used to say. Obsessive. Nobody cares about a 16th of an inch, Warren. Nobody but you. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd spent my whole life measuring things that didn't matter to anyone, marking boundaries nobody else cared about, driving stakes into ground that would outlast me but wouldn't remember my name. I poured another drink. The journals blurred together. All those numbers, all that precision. What was the point? In a week, a judge would rule, and if he ruled wrong, everything I'd measured would belong to Rick Holloway, would get subdivided into plots called Harmony Acres or some such nonsense. The survey monuments I'd placed would get pulled up to make room for sidewalks and streetlights, 40 years erased in an afternoon. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but it was Margot. Warren? Her voice was careful. Where are you? Barn office. Have you been drinking? Some. Silence. Then, I'm coming over. Don't need company. I didn't ask what you needed. I'm coming over. She hung up before I could argue. I sat there in the cold barn, staring at the journals. My handwriting had changed over the years. The 1989 entries were tight and cramped. Young man's handwriting trying to prove something. By 2000, it had loosened, grown more confident. After 2010, it got smaller again, presbyopia setting in, compensating with reading glasses. All those years. All that work. For what? Headlights swept across the barn window. Margot's SUV pulling into the driveway. I heard her door slam, boots on gravel, the barn door creaking open. She took one look at me and the whiskey bottle, didn't say anything, just pulled up a feed bucket and sat down. Want to tell me what's going on? She asked quietly. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am boring. Maybe all this, I gestured at the journals, is just me being small and obsessive about things that don't matter. That's the whiskey talking. Is it? I spent 40 years measuring property lines, marking boundaries, making sure everything was precise and documented and correct. And for what? So my wife could steal the documentation and sell everything to a developer? I laughed, bitter. Hell of a legacy. Margot leaned forward, elbows on her knees. The barn's single bulb cast harsh shadows across her face. You want to know why she called you boring? Margot said. Because you had integrity. Because you couldn't be manipulated or charmed or distracted from what was right. Because you built something real instead of something pretty. Lot of good. That did me. Warren, look at me. I did. Her eyes were fierce. Your work isn't boring. It's permanent. Every boundary you marked, every survey you completed, every monument you placed, that's truth made solid. That's honesty you can drive a stake through. She stood up, grabbed one of the journals, flipped it open. This is your life's work, not measuring for the sake of measuring. You were creating certainty in an uncertain world, giving people something they could count on. And now it's all going away. Not if I can help it. She set the journal down. But Warren, I need you to fight. I can't do this alone. I need you to believe your work mattered, because it did. It does. I stared at the journals, decades of entries, thousands of properties surveyed, hundreds of disputes settled because my measurements were accurate, my documentation was thorough, my word was good. My husband used to say that boring people are just people who tell the truth consistently, Margot said softly. Exciting people make promises they don't keep. Boring people show up and do the work, day after day, year after year. She paused. You're not boring, Warren. You're reliable. And that terrified her. The barn was quiet except for mice in the walls and wind through gaps in the siding. What if we don't find the lockbox? Then we go to court with what we have. Curtis's receipt proving your granddad bought it. Your journals proving you documented everything. My testimony that Diane had access to the house before you moved in. Character witnesses from every man at that auction. She met my eyes. We make the judge see that the absence of documents is evidence of theft, not evidence of joint ownership. That's a hard sell. I've made harder sells, she smiled slightly. I told you, I fought my in-laws for 2 years. They had money and lawyers, and they made me out to be a villain. But I won, because I was right. And you're right, too. I picked up my granddad's journal, the earliest one, opened to a random page, and there, in his cramped handwriting, was a note I'd forgotten about. Measure twice, mark permanent. This ground holds our name. Don't let anyone tell you precision is small. Truth is always worth the trouble. My throat went tight. He knew, I said. Somehow he knew I'd need to read that. Margot read over my shoulder. Is that from the will? No, just a note he wrote in the margin of a property survey. I traced the words with my finger, but it sounds like him. She pulled out her phone, snapped a picture of the page. Can I use this? In court? Yeah. Good. She put the phone away. Now get up. We're going inside. I'm making coffee and you're going to eat something. And then we're going to prepare for this hearing like we're going to win. Because we are. How do you know? Because the alternative is letting Rick Holloway turn your granddad's legacy into Sunset Meadows. And I'll be damned if I let that happen. She pulled me to my feet. I was unsteady, but she steadied me. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars sharp overhead, the smell of thawing earth and coming spring mixing with wood smoke from the farmhouse chimney. Margot's hand on my arm was warm and certain. Come on, she said. We've got work to do. The courthouse reopened Monday morning after a weekend thaw. March had arrived with warmer temperatures and muddy roads. I wore my good suit, the one I kept for funerals and county meetings. Margot met me on the courthouse steps, carrying 2 briefcases and wearing her courtroom face, sharp and focused. Inside, the building smelled like floor wax and old wood. Our footsteps echoed on marble floors as we climbed to the 2nd floor. Judge Morrison's courtroom was oak-paneled, with high windows letting in pale morning light. Diane sat on the opposite side with her new lawyer, Marcus Fenway, expensive suit, silver hair, confident smile. Rick Holloway sat behind them in the gallery. So did Noah. I took my seat beside Margot. The wooden bench was hard and cold. All rise. Judge Morrison entered. 70-something, gray beard, reputation for no-nonsense rulings. He settled into his chair and surveyed both sides over reading glasses. This is a motion for partition of real property, he said. Mrs. Castellan seeks to force sale of a farm held as marital property. Mr. Castellan contest. Let's hear arguments. Fenway stood, smooth, practiced. Your Honor, the facts are straightforward. Warren and Diane Castellan were married for 35 years. During that time, they lived on and improved the farm in question. Under state law, property acquired during marriage is presumed marital regardless of how title is held. Mrs. Castellan contributed to this property through homemaking, emotional support, and partnership. She's entitled to her share. Mr. Castellan inherited this property before marriage, Margot countered, standing. Premarital assets remain separate unless intentionally converted to marital property. We have documentation showing— What documentation? Fenway interrupted. They've provided survey journals and receipts. Nothing proving inheritance, no will, no deed showing separate ownership. After 35 years, the farm is clearly marital. Judge Morrison held up a hand. Miss Hensley, do you have the original inheritance documents? The will? The deed transferring property to your client? The courtroom went silent. Your Honor, we have evidence those documents existed, Margot said carefully. We have Mr. Castellan's 1989 survey journal referencing his grandfather's will. We have a receipt showing the grandfather purchased a fireproof lockbox for important papers 1 month before his death. We have testimony that Mrs. Castellan had access to the farmhouse during the 3 months it sat empty between the grandfather's death and the marriage. Fenway smiled. Speculation, conspiracy theories. The simple explanation is that no such documents exist. If they did, Mr. Castellan would have produced them. Or they were taken, Margot shot back, by someone who knew they proved separate ownership. Your Honor, Fenway said, voice dripping condescension, this is desperate. My client can't be blamed for documents that mysteriously vanished. Judge Morrison frowned. Ms. Hensley, without the actual documents, I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Fenway. 35 years of marriage creates a strong presumption of marital property. Then let me show you something else, Margot said. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a folder. I petitioned the county recorder's office. On March 20th, 1989, James Castellan filed a will with the county. It's public record, and I have a copy. The courtroom erupted. Fenway stood. Diane's face went white. Margot handed the document to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Morrison. I couldn't breathe. She'd found it. Somehow, Margot had found Granddad's will. Judge Morrison read in silence. The only sound was paper rustling and the radiator clanking. Finally, he looked up. This will leaves the farm to Warren Castellan specifically, names him sole heir, filed with the county 2 months before his marriage to the petitioner. Your Honor, filing doesn't prove, Fenway started. It proves intent, Morrison interrupted. It proves the grandfather wanted this property to stay with Warren alone, and it proves Mr. Castellan's inheritance predates the marriage. He looked at Diane. Mrs. Castellan, did you know about this will? Diane's lawyer whispered to her. She shook her head. Speak up, Morrison said. I don't remember, Diane said. You had access to the farmhouse before the wedding, correct? Your former husband testified you had a key to measure for curtains. Yes, but... And you're claiming you never saw this lockbox? Never saw any inheritance documentation? Diane glanced at Fenway. I don't recall. Morrison's expression hardened. Convenient memory, Mrs. Castellan. He turned to Margot. Ms. Hensley, do you have additional evidence? Yes, Your Honor. I'd like the court to consider a site visit. Mr. Castellan would like to walk you through the property survey he conducted in 1989, show you the 42 monuments he placed, each one documented in his journal, physical evidence that this was his property, maintained by him, marked by him, long before the marriage. Morrison checked his watch. I have time this afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll meet you at the farm. At 2 o'clock, a caravan of vehicles pulled into my driveway. Judge Morrison in his sedan, Margot in her SUV, Fenway and Diane in separate cars, a court reporter, and to my surprise, Curtis in his pickup with Pastor Gill beside him. Figured you might want witnesses, Curtis said, climbing out. The judge raised an eyebrow but didn't object. I loaded the 1952 Surveyor's Transit, Curtis's gift, into the truck bed. Margot handed me my granddad's journal, the one from 1989. We walked the property, all of us, through mud and across thawing fields to each of the 12 key monuments I'd selected to demonstrate the survey pattern. At each stake, I set up the transit and showed Judge Morrison the measurements, explained how I'd established the baseline, how I'd calculated each angle, how I'd driven each monument to exact specifications. Morrison listened without comment, but he was paying attention, checking my journal entries against the physical stakes, noting the precision, the consistency. At Monument 17, southwest corner, I stopped. Your Honor, this ground has been in my family for 3 generations. My granddad cleared it, my father worked it, and I've maintained it for 40 years. Every fence line, every field boundary, every improvement, I documented it all, not because I had to, because it mattered. I opened the journal to the page with Granddad's handwritten note, showed it to Morrison. Measure twice, mark permanent. This ground holds our name, Morrison read aloud. He looked up at me. Your grandfather wrote this? Yes, sir, in the margin of his own survey notes. He was teaching me the work, showing me what it meant to establish something that would last. Morrison studied the stake at our feet. Brass cap gleaming in March sunlight, numbers stamped clear at WC 1989. Mr. Castellan, Morrison said slowly. I've reviewed property disputes for 30 years. I've never seen documentation this thorough. He closed the journal, handed it back to me. This isn't just a survey. This is a legacy. Behind us, Diane stood next to Fenway, arms crossed. Her face was unreadable. Morrison turned to her. Mrs. Castellan, I'm ruling against partition. This property was clearly separate before your marriage and remains separate throughout. Your motion is denied. Diane's composure cracked. This isn't fair. I spent 35 years on that farm. You spent 35 years in a marriage to a man who owned a farm, Morrison corrected. That doesn't make the farm yours, especially when you had knowledge of his separate ownership and chose not to disclose it. He paused. I'm also ordering that if you possess any original estate documents, wills, deeds, lockboxes, you turn them over to the court within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in contempt charges. Diane's face went red, then white. Morrison walked back toward his car. Curtis clapped me on the shoulder. Pastor Gill nodded. Margot stood beside me, watching Diane and Fenway argue in harsh whispers near their cars. We won, she said quietly. Yeah. You okay? I looked across my fields, brown earth showing through melting snow, first hints of green where winter rye was sprouting. Survey monuments marking boundaries that had held for 40 years and would hold for 40 more. Yeah, I said. I'm okay. Rick Holloway left without a word, Lexus spitting mud as he accelerated down the driveway. Noah stood by his truck, uncertain. Finally, he walked over. Uncle Warren, He stopped. I'm sorry. Diane showed me documents that looked real. I thought, I know what you thought. Is there any way to fix this? I studied him, my sister's son, all I had left of her. You want to learn surveying? I asked. He blinked. What? Spring's coming, a lot of fence work to do, boundary markers to verify. If you want to learn the work, I'll teach you. But you'll actually work. No shortcuts, no complaining. Noah's eyes went bright. Yes, I'd like that. Be here Saturday, 7 a.m. Bring boots and work gloves. He nodded, nearly shaking my hand off with enthusiasm, then climbed in his truck and left. Margot and I stood in my driveway as the sun dropped toward the horizon. March evening, smell of thawing earth and warming air. First robin of spring called from the barn roof. Thank you, I said. You did the work, Warren. I just showed it to the judge. How'd you find the will? At the county recorder? She smiled. Filed March 20th, 1989, right there in public records. Fenway never thought to look. Her smile faded slightly. Though I suspect Diane knew it was there all along. She just hoped you wouldn't think to check. The lockbox? We may never find it. But the recorded will is just as good. She touched my arm. Come on, let's go inside. I'll make coffee and we can figure out the next steps. We walked toward the farmhouse. Behind us, the survey monuments caught the last light. 42 brass caps marking boundaries that would outlast us both. Ground that held my name. Truth made permanent. The final settlement happened 2 weeks later in Margot's office. Diane signed papers dividing what was actually marital, her retirement account, the car she drove, the savings account she'd kept separate. I kept the farm, my truck, my surveying equipment, and the tools in the barn. She sat across from me at the conference table. No lawyer this time. Fenway had withdrawn after the hearing, told her the case was unwinnable. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said when she signed the last page. She looked up, surprised, maybe expecting anger or bitterness, but I didn't have any left. Just exhaustion and relief. I thought the farm would make me happy, she said quietly. Selling it, I mean. Starting over somewhere new with Rick. And now? Rick's investors pulled out when the judge ruled. Turns out he needed the farm sale to make his development viable. Without it, she shrugged. He stopped returning my calls 3 days ago. I didn't say anything. Wasn't my problem anymore. She gathered her papers, stood. At the door she paused. For what it's worth, I never understood why the boundaries mattered so much to you. Why you spent so much time measuring and marking and documenting. I thought it was obsessive. It wasn't about boundaries, but I said. It was about knowing where I stood, having something solid under my feet. She nodded, not understanding, but maybe accepting she never would. Then she left. Margot came back into the conference room carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon. It's 3 in the afternoon, I said. Special occasions call for special measures. She poured. To freedom and solid ground. We drank. The bourbon burned clean. What happens now? She asked. Now I go home and fix the south fence. Check the culvert before spring rains. Maybe plant that pollinator meadow I've been planning. And after that? I looked at her, really looked. Saw the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in how she carried herself, the way she'd fought beside me without asking for anything in return. After that, maybe I take you to dinner, proper dinner, not just coffee and fence repair. She smiled. I'd like that. No complications, no expectations. Just 2 people who enjoy each other's company, see where it goes. I can work with that. Late March afternoon, I drove out to the farm with Noah following in his truck. We unloaded stakes and string in the old surveyor's Transit, the one Curtis had given back to me. We're marking the pollinator meadow, I told Noah. 30 acres on the South 40, native grasses, wildflowers, something for the bees. Noah had shown up every Saturday since the hearing, learned to drive fence posts, repair gates, read survey notes. He was earnest and hardworking in a way I hadn't expected, maybe my sister's stubbornness coming through. We spent the afternoon laying out boundaries. I taught him how to sight through the Transit, how to calculate angles, how to drive stakes true. Why do all this work for a meadow? He asked. Nobody's going to see the boundary markers but you. That's not why you mark them. You mark them so you know where you are. So 50 years from now, someone can come back and know exactly what was intended. I adjusted the tripod. Precision matters. Not because anyone's watching, because it's right. He nodded, getting it, or at least trying to. By evening, we'd placed 12 stakes. The earth was soft, giving way easy under the posts. Smell of warming soil and new grass. Crocuses were blooming in patches, purple and white pushing through last year's dead growth. Margot's SUV pulled into the driveway around 6. She'd been in town filing the final divorce decree. How'd it go? I asked. All done. Officially filed. You're a free man. She walked over to where we were working, studied our stakes. Pollinator meadow? 30 acres. Noah's helping. She smiled at my nephew. Good to see you. Good to be here, ma'am. The three of us stood there as the sun dropped lower. First fireflies of the season were starting to blink in the field margins. A robin sang from the fence line. Soft evening light made everything look gentler, more forgiving. I'm making dinner, Margot said. Nothing fancy. Pasta and salad. You both hungry? Noah looked at me. I nodded. Yeah, I said. We could eat. We walked toward the farmhouse together. Behind us, the survey stakes stood straight and true, markers for something that would bloom and grow and last. The ground held my name now, solid and permanent, and for the first time in years, I could stand on it without wondering if it would hold. 3 months later, early June. I sat on the front porch at sunset, watching Noah repair the east fence line. He'd moved into the old farmhand cabin, taken a part-time job at Curtis's auction house. Said he wanted to learn the equipment business, maybe start his own surveying company someday. Inside, Margot was drafting paperwork for the Conservation Trust. We'd decided to protect the farm permanently, 30 acres for the pollinator meadow, the rest for sustainable agriculture. When I died, it would stay intact. No subdivisions, no sunset meadows. The pollinator meadow was in full bloom now. Black-eyed Susans and coneflowers and native grasses swaying in evening breeze. Bees worked the flowers, storing up summer. The survey stakes I'd placed in March stood among the blooms, brass caps catching light. Pastor Gill had asked me last Sunday if I forgave Diane. I told him I didn't think about her much anymore. And I meant it. Forgiveness felt too active, too involved. I'd moved past her into something quieter, indifference. The only real freedom after betrayal. Margot came out carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, handed me one, sat in the chair beside mine. We didn't speak, didn't need to, just sat in comfortable silence, watching the day end. The land stretched out before us, marked and measured and known, every boundary clear, every stake driven true, 42 monuments holding my name in brass and bedrock. Your granddad would be proud, Margot said finally. I thought about his note. Measure twice, mark permanent. This ground holds our name. Yeah, I said. I think he would. The sun touched the horizon, painting the fields gold. First stars appeared overhead. The smell of honeysuckle drifted on warm air mixing with new-cut hay from the Johnson place. Noah's truck started up. He waved driving past, headed home for the night. Margot's hand found mine, warm and certain and real. I'd spent 40 years measuring boundaries, marking what was mine, documenting what was true. Turns out that was enough. The ground held my name. And I was standing on solid earth at last.